In business today, three things to know. First, the economy on cruise control. A new forecast by economists has the U.S. economy growing faster than expected with consumers spending more. What do the numbers mean and will they hold up? Then, a general mess at General Motors. Now there are accusations GM committed bankruptcy fraud by hiding defects in cars that are being recalled. And North Dakota's golden path to opportunity, why the state has the lowest unemployment rate in the nation. Arise Exchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. An emergency meeting of industrialized Western nations kicked off in the Netherlands Monday, where G7 nations are discussing what to do about Crimea and Russian forces on the move. Today, Russia seized another military base in Crimea. President Obama traveled to The Hague as part of a four-day trip that includes stops in Brussels, Italy, and Saudi Arabia. Our James Blue is traveling with the president, and he is in The Hague right now. Good evening to you, James. I know it's late there. So why don't you update us on exactly what they decided today?
Well, basically, President Obama called a special meeting of the G7. This is without Russia in attendance. And they declared the Hague Declaration. And what the Hague Declaration does is sort of spell out in very specific terms how upset the international community is with Russia's move into the Ukraine and its seizure of Crimea. Basically says that it is against the rule of law. It kicks Russia out of the G8. It plans a boycott of the planned G8 summit that was to be held in Sochi, Russia, on the site of the Olympics. They were to gather there this summer for the annual G8 convention. And instead, they're going to actually move to Brussels. And again, this is all an attempt to isolate and to make Russia pay for its illegal seizure of Crimea, with the hope that these steps will bring Russia to the table and create some path for Crimea to return to Ukraine.
James, but in statements saying that they're upset and everything, that's not going to seriously have an impact on Russia coming back to the table, right? What kind of impact will this declaration have, and what about sanctions?
Well, certainly sanctions are going to happen, and sanctions are planned. And basically, when he got here, in an interview with a Dutch newspaper, President Obama said that the global growth will definitely be impacted with the sanctions that they are planning to put into place. Here's the issue. The sanctions that were put into place last week really just affect Russians. Europe gets over a third of its gas from Russia. The sanctions that they're going to put into place are going to have a real impact on all of the European countries that do business with Russia.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that, James. Is there a sense that the European nations are going to sign on to this? Because we know their economy is pretty fragile to begin with.
Their economies are fragile, and I think what the president is doing with the support of the U.S. Congress is trying to come up with ways to help Europe replace the gas that they get from Russia and to try to soften some of the economic blows that tougher sanctions will have both on Russia and its European trading partners. He was in The Hague today. He'll be here tomorrow. In addition to the G7, there's a nuclear security conference. But most importantly, on Wednesday, the president goes to Brussels, where there's an EU and U.S. summit. And I think there, some of the real specifics on how these sanctions might impact Russia and the EU and the world economy are going to be discussed. But please know, President Obama says there is going to be pain, and it will be felt by everyone.
Okay, James Blue, Arise, Washington Bureau Chief. Thank you so much, James. Talk to you tomorrow. The markets drifted lower Monday ahead of a full week of economic data with little earnings news and the status quo for now in the Ukraine. There isn't much to push traders one way or the other. Key news this week, home sales and home prices, the nation's gross domestic product, and consumer confidence. We'll talk more about economic news this week and whether a report that the economy may be picking up quicker than originally expected is on target or not. But first, a check of the final numbers on Wall Street. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down 25.76 to 16,277. The S&P 500 pulling back a little bit, and the Nasdaq down 50, 42.26, despite a by Apple. The Wall Street Journal reporting today Apple is in talks with Comcast to set up a streaming television service for allowing for faster service of Apple's set-top boxes. Apple closing up 632 to 539.19. Coca-Cola is under fire for its management compensation. In a letter to shareholders, investor David Winters says Coca-Cola's proposed equity plan will significantly erode the per-share value of Coca-Cola shares. Coca-Cola closing down 4 cents to 38.49. And nutrition and weight loss company Herbalife says it will allow billionaire activist investor Carl Icahn 3 more board seats on its board, bringing the total to 5 seats. Icahn has been a big supporter of Herbalife, closing up 333 to 52.87. And taking a look at commodities, gold down and oil pulling back 4 cents to 99.42. A survey of economists finds many are more bullish on the U.S. economy than before. The consensus of 48 economists surveyed by the National Association of Business Economics found that the U.S. gross domestic product could reach 3% by year's end, and that consumer spending could increase 2.6%, up from 2.4%. The economists also expect hourly wages to rise. Milton Ezrati, senior economist at Lord Abbett, is here. Milton has a new book out, 30 Tomorrows, the Next 3 Decades of Globalization, Demographics, and How We Will Live. Milton, thank you for joining us. I'll ask you about the book in a few moments. What about this report from economists that they're looking a little bit more bullish on it? Because your notes say that you don't think it's going to get to 3%.
No, I don't think so. It's possible, but I don't think it's likely. A lot of economists looked at how strong the third quarter was. We had some good numbers as we came into the year. The numbers are getting a little mixed now. They're just extrapolating that. At least that's my take. Our take at Lord Abbett is that this economy, which has been laboring under a lot of things that have kept it slow, continues. Those things are still in place. All the confusion, all the uncertainty remains in place. We're looking for something closer to 2.5%.
And you say there are still some problems in the employment market, meaning we're going to possibly see the rate tick up a little bit because people come back into the market, that there's still some challenges there.
Well, there is. I mean, all the things that have made people reluctant to hire throughout this entire recovery, and hiring has been historically extremely sluggish for recovery, they're all still in place. There's a lot of confusion about the Affordable Care Act. There's confusion about Dodd-Frank. And there's still a legacy about the Great Recession. People are frightened. A lot of managers are reluctant to spend money in any way.
And there's confusion about what the Fed might do, isn't there now? Because Janet Yellen says maybe interest rates are going to tick up, maybe not, and the governor comes out and sort of counters that a little bit.
Yeah, there is some confusion there. I'm a little surprised. No, I'm not surprised that people are confused. But I think the Fed has actually been pretty clear. And I think what Yellen said was consistent with that. She's probably going to couch her language a little softer and make sure to tell everybody that she's not going to pull the rug out from under them. But yes, I think people are concerned when the Fed's going to move and how suddenly it's going to move. I think they've telegraphed that, but that doesn't change the fact that other people are worried.
What do you think then the markets are focused on right now? We do have a bunch of economic news that will come out this week. Month-by-month numbers, you can't get any specific area on that, but where do you see the gross domestic product coming in at, for example, and how is that going to be kind of forecasted going forward?
Well, I think the first quarter GDP, the gross domestic product, is going to be a little slow. We had 2 terrible months of weather, not just on the East Coast, but throughout most of the country. That held back hiring, that held back a lot of activity. It increased some because there was more fuel, there were more deliveries, but by and large, it held back the economy. So I think this is going to look a little slow, may change consensus expectations. There may be some catch-up in the spring, but over the course of the year, we think the same old sluggish 2.5% is about right.
And what does that mean, a 2.6% growth for the economy, for the regular person? In that, does it mean that inflation stays low? Does it mean that the employment market remains soft? Historically, what does that number feel like to people?
It feels like the way we've been living until now. We've had that kind of a sluggish recovery. So inflation remains not a threat, or if it is a threat, it's a threat for the long term. It means that the labor markets remain soft. And it means that the opportunities that Americans have customarily felt were their due are still on hold.
And manufacturing, we saw a little bit of a soft point for manufacturing this month. Could be weather related, do you think? And do you think that's going to start to pick up a little bit?
Well, I think there is a weather related thing on manufacturing because it's hard to get deliveries and it was hard to get people to work in some places of the country. So that probably kept the number down. We came into the year with a much stronger number than was fundamentally sustainable. So there's also that kind of a correction going on. It will have some bounce back from the weather, but that's all it will be.
Okay, let me ask you about the book. What are you focusing on?
The book is about the aging of populations in the United States, Europe, and Japan. the mix of too many old people, too few young producers, taxpayers, pension contributors, what that means to prospects for economic growth and finance. And mostly, what I found fun about the book is how we can respond, protect our prosperity despite this demographic challenge.
Okay, Milton Ezrati, senior economist and market strategist with Lord Abbett. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll see you back here soon. U.S. automaker General Motors faces a new investigation Monday, this time on whether the company committed bankruptcy fraud. GM filed for bankruptcy in 2009 as part of a government bailout plan. Now the question is whether the company knowingly failed to disclose its knowledge of faulty ignition switches. That defect has led to hundreds of crashes and at least a dozen deaths, although reports say the number could be more than 300. GM has recalled 1.6 million cars because of the defect. The issue, legally, the old bankrupt GM may not be liable for those accidents, leading to the question of who's going to pay for them. Automotive expert and CEO of Entertainment Radio Network, Alan Taylor, is back here on Arise Exchange to sort of walk us through this potential landmine for GM. Alan, boy, this is yet another problem that the new GM CEO, Mary Barra, has in front of her is this possible investigation. What do you make of it?
Well, I think for a 51-year-old woman who's been at GM for 33 years, this is trial by fire, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. She has certainly gotten thrown in there. She had a very brief honeymoon, if you recall, where she says that we're going to build better cars, and now she's looking at all of this past. What do you, how serious do you think this bankruptcy fraud allegation is? And, the question is the government going to indict itself? Because I wonder what kind of due diligence the government did before they bailed it out.
You know, and that is a good question. They knew about it for 13 years before GM announced it. And so will they go back, statute of limitations, obviously, 7 years? But at the same time, this will probably blow over. GM is making such amazing vehicles. Don't forget, they got North American Car and Truck of the Year this year. People are really liking. Matter of fact, if you look at today, the stock closed at $35.14. It had a high of $37.69. But even on the news of this, it only went from $36.11 to $35.01 back on the 21st of March. I don't think that the masses are going to look at this and think, oh, GM doesn't build good cars. I think that it's just going to be a big, big test for Mary Barra, who, by the way, is very well loved at General Motors.
Well, I think that could be the salvation here for General Motors, is for her to say, look, that was the old regime. And, we messed up here. We're going to try to make it right. But if you look forward, we're doing the right things now. We're building better cars.
And you know what? Every automaker has recalls. As a matter of fact, there's also been another 1.2 million SUVs and nearly 400,000 other vehicles, of course, that have been recalled because of other problems, airbags, ignition switches. I got into my brother's Cadillac Escalade last night, and the ignition switch didn't want to work. And he says, oh, you just got to jiggle it. So, these things happen.
Right. Well, but they happen, but there are a bunch of deaths connected to this. And I think the real question is the cover-up and whether what is now basically the Motors Corporation, which is sort of this old GM, if they're going to have the resources to pay off these lawsuits. Do you get any sense that the new GM is going to step in here or be forced to step in here?
Well, they have already set aside $300 million this quarter to account for losses and these repairs and fixes. And I think that's just the beginning. And she's also requested a comprehensive internal safety review. I think Mary is going to fix this. By the way, I think the spotlight needs to be on old Dan Ackerson, the previous CEO, who said he was leaving because he had family issues, his wife was ill, and the next thing you know, he pops up on another big company's board and as CEO somewhere else.
You think, Alan, that maybe he knew a little bit more about what was literally coming down the road?
I think he got the hell out of there before what hit the fan.
Okay, automotive expert Alan Taylor, thank you. Coming up, how the oil boom is turning the once sleepy state of North Dakota into a hotbed of jobs and business. You're watching Arise Exchange.
Arise News is a different kind of network. We are able to tell our own stories, and we're able to cover stories in a way that other media outlets don't do. We've got world-class journalists, veteran journalists who have been in this industry for decades, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes as well. Arise News is a place where we can tell stories in an interesting, factual, inclusive way like no one else in the business can.
Some liken it to a modern-day gold rush. North Dakota's huge oil boom and gas boom has brought thousands of job seekers to the state for years now. In some cities, the population has quadrupled. But even as the state's economic growth tops the nation's, with many employees pulling in six-figure salaries, the boom has also resulted in a severe housing shortage. Home prices have more than tripled, and rents are currently the highest in the country. We're talking about North Dakota. Along with a housing crunch, there's a strained infrastructure, higher costs for living, and more crime. To talk about the state's booming economy is Michael Gallagher, District Director of the North Dakota Small Business Administration, and he joins us from Fargo, North Dakota. Michael, welcome to Arise Exchange. And I have to tell you, you guys are a hardy bunch, because here in the Northeast, we've been complaining about the winter weather all year, and you go through it every single year. Tell me a little bit about how North Dakota has all of a sudden sort of snuck up on the rest of the country, about how successful you guys have been.
Well, we've had a lot of success with the oil industry, of course, as you are aware, and you've said in your preliminary comments and stuff. But North Dakota is really kind of a best-kept secret. There's a lot of sectors of the economy that have been strong for a long period of time, and they continue to be strong and they're growing. The ag economy, commodity prices are some of the best they've been in years. Our farmers are doing well. We're exporting a lot of product to other countries. The service and retail industry is doing phenomenal in the state. A lot of that is to keep up with the demand from people coming in and working in the oil industry, but it's strong in all areas of the state, in the east as well as the west.
Michael, this is
so North Dakota's been booming.
Yeah, this is sort of a good problem to have, but it is still a problem. Has North Dakota, from an infrastructure and a government standpoint, put itself in a position where they could accept all these influx of workers?
I think they have. They're doing a great job. In fact, we talk often with economic development people in western Montana, and I think we're ahead of the curve, because they're coming up with the same problems with the oil industry in western, or in eastern Montana, I should say. And North Dakota's really been ahead of the curve as far as building roads, building water to the various communities, dealing with all of the needs that come with this type of growth.
And let me ask you something. With the oil business going into North Dakota, are small businesses, I take it, prospering enough from this? Are you sure that the oil and the money is staying in the state?
Yes. There's a lot of growth, and there's a lot of good growth in service, in construction industry, in transportation. All sectors are doing well because of the oil economy. But like I said, there are other sectors of the economy that are doing as well.
Well, you had mentioned agriculture, hospitality, restaurant workers. How much of that do you think is tied to the oil industry? Because I'm wondering if you worry that you're going to have a Dallas, Texas-like problem, where you're going to build up all of these offices and you're going to build up all of this housing, and then the oil market sort of disappears.
Well, they've said that the oil is going to be around for at least 20, 30 or more years. But the thing is that we don't find even in eastern North Dakota, where there isn't that kind of impact by the oil, we find those same conditions as far as housing shortages. We're finding it with high or low unemployment rates. I mean, I think in Fargo area, unemployment is just slightly over 2%. And they're not impacted so much by the oil industry. They have a lot of manufacturing, technology jobs, medical care. All sectors are doing well, even on the eastern part of the state.
That need to support the people living there, certainly. Let me ask you about whether you think that there's a tipping point, though, because as people come in, sort of inflation rises. You want to manage that correctly, don't you?
Well, I think as far as the inflationary, yeah, you do want to manage it correctly. But they've been building, especially in the housing industry, they've been building a lot of affordable housing. And so it's kind of a supply and demand type of a situation. And as these new units come on board, more people are able to afford and find housing that's appropriate for their needs.
Yeah, the fact is, as long as there are jobs, people are going to come looking for them. What about the state? How the state has encouraged businesses? Talk to us about the regulatory environment, the tax policy, and what other states can learn from North Dakota.
Well, I think there was a recent article in the Fargo Forum that showed where people were coming back to North Dakota from. A lot of them have been from Minnesota. It used to be where there was a lot of out-migration, primarily of youth, where they would get their college degree and then they would take off, and a lot of them would go to the Twin Cities areas, to Minneapolis and St. Paul. But they found when they moved there that the tax the taxes in Minnesota were high, that the cost of
Okay, I think we lost Michael Gallagher there talking about the oil boom in North Dakota, and certainly, of course, connected to the fracking story. One of the things we would talk to him about is how North Dakota has been very welcoming for fracking, while other states have been concerned about environmental issues and may not be receiving at least the economic benefits from fracking. So we thank Michael Gallagher from the Small Business Administration in North Dakota. Taking a look at some of our business stories for the day. Grubhub, the largest U.S. online food delivery service, plans to raise up to $178 million from its IPO. The Chicago-based company, one of the largest consumer.coms to tap the public market, said it expects to price its initial public offering of over 7 million shares between $20 and $22. Grubhub, which handles pickup and delivery orders for restaurants online and the phone, has nearly 29,000 restaurants and close to 3.5 million diners in its network. Its stock is expected to be listed on the New York Stock Exchange under the symbol GRUB. By the way, Grubhub and Seamless are now the same company. Cisco is planning to spend more than $1 billion to build up its cloud computing network. The San Jose, California-based company will use the money over the next 2 years to expand its data centers for the new service called Cisco Cloud Services. The move makes Cisco the latest to join a number of companies that would rather rent computing space than build their own. The company already provides cloud-related services, including the online conference provider WebEx. And top climate scientists are gathering in Japan this week to finish up a massive report on the impact of global warming. The meeting of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change includes over 60 scientists and representatives from about 100 governments. Leaked drafts of the report say the dangers of a warming Earth are more immediate and local than scientists once thought. And it's not just the melting ice threatening animals and plants. It's about human hunger, disease, drought, flooding, refugees, and war becoming worse. Ahead, an alleged workplace injury at a website that promotes adultery makes one woman our favorite person of the day. You're watching Arise Exchange.
Well, Arise is the only network that really covers comprehensively the African diaspora. It gives people in other parts of the world of color a chance to know about people here in the United States, us to know about them, and the world to know about us. So it's kind of an educational experience for everybody involved. Getting to know people through stories, through personal stories. You really get a chance to know what people are actually all about, what communities are about. How are we different? But more importantly, what commonalities we all share.
Time now for our favorite person of the day, when we pick one person who grabbed our attention and not for the right reasons. Today, that person is Doriana Silva, a former employee of the infidelity website Ashley Madison, who is apparently shocked that the website where married people go looking to have an affair isn't the most ethical to begin with. Silva has filed a $21 million lawsuit against Ashley Madison, alleging that she injured herself while typing up thousands of fake profiles of married women in order to entice men to pay subscription fees. She claims she worked so hard that she injured her hands and wrists, and that she was duped into committing online fraud. You see, apparently, she had no problems helping people commit online adultery, but drew the line at fake profiles. The parent company of Ashley Madison, Avid Life Media, denied the claims, saying the profiles were used for testing purposes, and has countersued her for $100,000. Further, the company says if she is so injured that she cannot use a keyboard, how is she able to routinely update her Facebook page? Silva says she would have turned down the job if she had known beforehand that creating fake online profiles is unethical. And so, Doriana Silva is our favorite person of the day. Next, tracking truck drivers so they stay in the right lane of the law. You're watching Arise Exchange.
One of the great things about Arise News, it is truly a multicultural global channel that is paying attention to communities of all different kinds, not just here in the United States, not just in Africa, but all around the world, as we're giving a voice to the people that don't traditionally have the kind of a voice that a mass media organization can have. You're getting here at Arise News that you're not going to find at the other networks is a unique perspective, and I think that's part of what Arise is here to do.
Truck drivers beware. Big Brother will soon be watching. Under the terms of a new proposal by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, Commercial trucks and buses crossing state lines will be monitored with an electronic tracking device how long vehicles are in action. The groups say the device would make it harder for drivers to misrepresent their hours and prevent accidents by tired drivers. Supporters of the plan say it's long overdue, but critics say it is a form of harassment for drivers. We welcome to the program Dave Osheki, Senior Vice President of Policy and Regulatory Affairs for the American Trucking Association. Dave, welcome to Arise Exchange. Let me ask you what this is about. How does this tagging work, basically, to track the trucks and the drivers?
Yeah, it's a device commonly referred to as an electronic logging device. For many decades, truck drivers in the trucking industry have recorded their time, their work time and their driving time on paper, commonly referred to as a paper logbook. So now it's moving into the electronic age, and it's called an electronic logging device. It's a device really a little bit bigger than a smartphone, a little bit smaller than a personal computer or laptop. And it does track driving time. It allows a driver to electronically record his work time that's not driving time. And they're devices that are more accurate than a person recording on a piece of paper.
Dave, you represent the industry, but I'm wondering how big of a problem this is of tired drivers, because I imagine they stay on the roads longer because they want to make more money. They get to deliver more packages.
Yeah, that's a sort of an old sort of common misperception of the industry. The industry is no longer that way. Sure, there's some folks around the edges that do fudge the rules, that may drive longer than they're supposed to, but the reality is the amount of falsification, the amount of tired driving is very low. But it's still a bit of an issue in the trucking industry. We support these devices. They're good for safety.
You do support these devices. I'm wondering why this took so long. For example, in the aviation industry, pilots have to clearly log their time, and they are tracked out all the time. So what is the argument about harassment or privacy about you're on the job?
Yeah, that's a good point, and some critics do sort of promote the driver privacy issue, and in part they're real because these devices don't just track, in some cases, work time and drive time. They also allow the drivers to email their family members and so forth. So really what's needed is to make sure that the business use for these devices is walled off from the personal use, and that can easily be done. And these devices have been in this industry in trucking for, 25 years now, so they're not new.
How does the industry itself monitor itself to make sure that drivers, not independent drivers, but let's say drivers that are working for larger companies, are not pushed to stretch, let's say, duty times and rest times, et cetera? Because there's got to be a lot of pressure, especially when we got off the weather that we just had, for example, this year, where everything gets behind schedule.
Yeah, certainly things do get behind schedule. The weather is a perfect example. But again, there's this idea that, and a misperception that so many drivers are being pushed and they're pushing themselves to make a lot of money. That's just not, that's not the industry that we know, that we represent. The vast majority of companies are responsible. They understand the value of operating safely, because if they don't operate safely, they're not going to be in business very long. Their insurance rates would go up and so forth. So again, there's a small percentage of folks around the edges that do violate the rules. These devices will catch those folks, drivers and companies.
Is that why you?
And overall, they're going to improve compliance and they're going to improve safety in the trucking industry.
Is that why you support the federal legislation here, basically, to make sure that everybody is playing by the same rules?
Yeah, there's three basic reasons. These devices will improve compliance with the rules. If the rules are good, they'll improve safety in the industry, and they will level the playing field. And so those are the three basic reasons.
And what about the independent drivers? Because we mentioned that the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association has come out against it. What are your conversations with them about trying to get them on board?
Yeah, I think, behind the scenes, I think they would tell you that they know that these devices are coming. They know they better track driving time. They still take the public stance in some ways that driver privacy, could be violated, that these devices may cost a little too much for independent contractors. But the reality is, again, they've been out there in the industry for many years. The prices come down, they've gotten better and so forth. So some of their arguments, are legitimate, but the reality is
and I imagine, Dave, we're running out of time, but I imagine there's a safety component here, knowing where the trucks are, for example. All right, Dave Osheki, Senior Vice President of Policy at the American Trucking Association. Thank you. And this week on Arise Exchange, we continue our series on the booming economy of North Dakota and why other states should take notice. Let's take a look at the final numbers here on Wall Street. Once again, a down day for the Dow, down 25 points to 16,277. The markets across the board in the red. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for watching Arise Exchange.